Hey guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be covering the third part of the book of the Bible, which is the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is the third book of the Hebrew Bible, and it basically explains the holiness of the Israelites. So this book takes place after Moses led the Israelites, the slaves, out of Egypt. And now this is the book of the Israelites basically becoming holy and exploring their holiness into like what they need to do to get it. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, because we're going to be here for a little bit as I explain to you the book of Leviticus. But before we get into that, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because these videos take so long to actually make, and it would make my day and my heart if you actually did that. Without further ado, let's get into the book of Leviticus. So it starts out with all the Israelites huddling around the tabernacle, which is the tent house of worship. And Moses is there, and he's standing in front of them, and he's getting ready to talk to God. And, Moses is getting a bunch of instructions from God, but before all of that gets better, God has to tell Moses to tell the Israelites a bunch of instructions on how to stay holy. Basically how the Israelites are going to, stay holy and stay in a good relationship with God. Now we're going to talk about the call to worship. One day, Moses hears God calling him, so Moses goes, and God basically tells Moses, I'm going to tell you to tell the Israelites how they should approach me with offerings. Basically, God introduced a sacrificial system, so there's a bunch of type of offerings that the Israelites are supposed to give God in order to maintain a healthy relationship with him. Basically, the sacrificial system was basically the Israelites giving offerings to God in order for God and the Israelites to maintain a healthy relationship. And he started them off with burnt offerings. A sacrifice where it shows that an animal will be burned all over to show surrender to God. That offer was basically general atonement, basically just the Israelites surrendering themselves to God. Next came the grain offering. The grain offering was basically just giving God like all that they had. Just like, you know what I'm saying? Like they just gave God all they had. Where people would bring flour mixed with oil, mixed with frankincense. I don't know how to say that word. It wasn't about animal sacrifices, but it was about dedicating the best they had to God. And then there were peace offerings. These were basically, it wasn't about sin, but it was about celebrating the relationship between God and his people. A portion of the animals were eaten by the person that was offering it. And another portion was given to the priest just to make sure that God's goodness was shared all together. And then, however, there was sin offerings. So sin offerings are kind of self-explanatory. They're basically offerings you give to God for him to forgive you of your sins. And if your heart was stained with sin at the time, the sin offerings would I'm pretty sure you guys can guess. Basically, it was atonement for sin at the time. So they were sin offerings. Are you enjoying this so far? I hope you are. And then there were guilt offerings. So guilt offerings were basically it wasn't also about forgiving or paying for sin. It was also that if they had wronged someone or took something they weren't supposed to, not only were you making atonements with God, but you were also making atonements with the person you wronged. Okay, now we're going to be talking about the consecration of the priests. I probably said that wrong, but please. Once these rituals were established, God had to turn his attention to the priests, and the priests kind of just they were chosen as mediators between the Israelites and God. God called Aaron, Moses' brother, and his sons to serve as priests. And then Moses anointed them and basically just told them what they had to do. And he also gave them fancy drip. And so God calls Aaron, Moses' brother, and he calls him to the tent of worship, which is called the tabernacle. That's what it's called. And God calls them to the tabernacle, and they go in there and they offer offerings. And it was a beautiful moment. And then Aaron and Aaron's sons give an offering of unauthorized fire, and God strikes them down for it. So yeah, Aaron's sons are now smoked. The names of Aaron's sons, let me see if I can remember. I think it was Nadab and Abihu. Abihu, which it's spelled Abihu. Yeah, I'm not good with these pronunciations, I'm sorry. And also the reason why they got struck down is because God didn't command it, and they, you know how that goes. And their deaths kind of served as a reminder that worship had to be done when God commanded it. Basically, how God wanted worship to be done to him, it had to be done or else you'd get... So that was the whole thing. The path to purity. This is another portion of the book of Leviticus. And then God calls to Moses, and God tells Moses, yo, these Israelites need to live a certain way from different people. They're with me now. They need to be holy, and you're going to teach them how to do it, because I'm going to tell you. God then gives instructions to Moses and details of what the Israelites are supposed to eat and what not to eat. And he's basically telling Moses foods that are clean and that are not clean. So God is basically giving them like a dietary plan. He's basically giving them foods that they can and cannot eat. And the foods that they can eat are like land animals. They can eat cows, chewed cud, like cows and sheep, but they cannot eat camels or pigs. They can't eat camels or pigs. They can eat sea creatures, but some are forbidden. Like shellfish and other sea creatures were just forbidden. Stuff like that. But it wasn't only about diet, it was about maintaining the purity of the people. Making sure that they didn't get mixed up with the other nations. So yeah, that's about it. Dealing with disease. Also, the Israelites were taught how to deal with disease. Like, for example, if someone had like a skin disease or something, the priest would have to come out, check them out, and if it was contagious, they had to send them out of the camp until they recovered so they didn't get the other people sick. And then when they came back, the people that were sick, and when they were healed, they came back and they were, how do I say this? Basically, there were rituals of purification to restore them to the community. These rituals kind of helped them understand spiritual importance. Not spiritual importance, spiritual cleanliness. Cleanliness. Basically, these rituals taught them how to be spiritually clean when it came to God. Even a woman who gave birth had to undergo a period of purification before returning to the tabernacle, which is a tent of worship that they had. Life was sacred, but it was also a reminder that life, death, even childbirth needed to be set apart from God. Oh, not from God, for God, sorry. The Day of Atonement. God also established a day for his people that could like atone, and they're basically it was an entire day that was dedicated to making atonement for him. The Day of Atonement. Once a year, the high priest would make an offering on behalf of everybody. On this day, 2 goats were chosen. One of them was chosen to be sacrificed, and the blood was going to be used to purify them. The other goat was called a scapegoat, and it was going to be symbolically, their sins were symbolically going to be placed on the goat, and then they would send the goat out to the desert, and, it would die. And, they'd send the goat out from the camp of where they were, so their sins would get far and far away from them, because their sins were attached to the goat, or the scapegoat. Now we're going to talk about the holiness code. And after that, as God continues talking to Moses, because we skipped a little bit, as God continues talking to Moses, he starts giving Moses laws on how to, on a lifestyle, because holiness is a lifestyle. And he's basically telling him, he was giving them laws on how they were supposed to live that would reflect God's ways and his holiness. There were rules about sexual morality, also how to treat others with justice, even how to celebrate feasts. The Israelites were to be called a light to the nations. That's what they were going to be called, a light to the nations. And the Israelites, their entire life was supposed to be holy. They had a bunch of things they were and were not supposed to do. Also, their whole lifestyle basically had to reflect on God's holiness. So based on how they treated people, how they treated each other, how they treated themselves, and most importantly, how they worshipped and treated God. Now we finna talk about the festivals. God also set calendars on when certain feasts were supposed to happen to celebrate Israel, and basically to celebrate Israel's history. and relationship with God. These included feasts like the Passover, celebrating their deliverance from Egypt, stuff like that. Basically, these were feasts to celebrate how God just basically all God did for them, and being their God. And every 7th year, the land itself that they were on had to like rest, so they couldn't harvest anything, they couldn't crop anything. In the year of Jubilee, when someone would sell their land on the year of Jubilee for I feel like temporarily they would get it back, and the people that were in poverty, they would be restored. Okay, now we finna talk about blessings and curses. I hope you have been enjoying the video so far. Please take this time to rehydrate yourselves, or maybe get something to eat. Yeah, there you go. And then God basically tells Moses, he gives him a series of promises and warnings, and he's like, yo, if the Israelites obey me and they follow me, I'll bless them, and if they don't and they will start rebelling, I'll curse them. But then God also offered a way back. So if the Israelites rebelled against him, but then they felt repentful and then they turned their ways against him, God would forgive them and he'd start blessing them again. Okay, now we're going to talk about the vows and dedications. And then Moses was given laws about vows, so basically in hopes that someone would dedicate something to God. Basically promises that people might make to God. If someone vowed to give a certain amount of money or property to God, they had to fulfill that vow. And the book of Leviticus ends with basically the whole shebang of God's people, and basically it was just a whole book about God giving the Israelites laws, rituals, and teaching them how to use offerings to him. And the book of Leviticus just basically talks about the holiness of God's people and the laws that they should follow. But yeah, that, ladies and gentlemen, is the entire book of Leviticus. If you guys want me to cover the entire Bible, I most definitely am. I just wanted to go ahead and say that. But yeah, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because a lot of work actually goes into these videos. So yeah, I feel like there's not much more to be said. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I thank you, I love you, and God bless.